Hi everyone, my name is Krista of Practical Astros, and I'm here with my new friend Mel. Hi Mel, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you? I'm doing great.
We are going to talk about Uranus, and I met Mel on Substack, and I'm just going to put her um, website up real quick. Mel is Earthshine Astrology. It's melpriestley.ca. She is
Hmm.
a Canadian astrologer, but we met over in Substack, talked about the decans we met before, and just kind of geeked out on Uranus. So Mel is ready to talk about Uranus, and there's a lot of things happening in the world that we can kind of maybe lay on Uranus's doorstep. We don't necessarily have to blame it for everything, but it's going to be kind of a different vibe shift with Uranus changing signs, and that's kind of what this conversation is going to be about. So, do you want to tell a little bit about just you and your practice, and give the audience a little bit of a primer of who you are?
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am Canadian. I'm based in Alberta, Canada. So I've been practicing astrology on, I guess I'd call it a professional level since about 2020. So the last few years, I've been into it for much longer than that, but 2020 was really what kickstarted me going public, if you will,
Mm,
with this. And I did some training and studies then, and I am now a consulting astrologer. I've always been a writer though, so prior
mm,
to writing about astrology, I was a food and wine and theater writer for many years, and then now it's pretty much astrology all the time. If you dig far enough back on my blog, you will find wine and food and other stuff.
yeah.
So just FYI, in case you're going deep there. But yeah, so that's essentially me. Yeah, up here in Canada, just sort of watching things. I would say I tend to focus more on mundane. Now I do natal
Mm,
consults with people all the times,
hmm
and I will write about natal astrology as well. But what captures me in terms of what I focus on for writing often is the more mundane aspects. As you can see from my site, there's some
hmm
forecasts and things going on. And 2026 sure has not disappointed in terms of major geopolitical shifts
Yep.
happening, with the
Yep.
major astrological shifts happening. So,
hmm I
yeah.
was looking at our earlier email threads this winter, and you had thrown out there like, I'm discussing with my other astrology friends, like the astrology of February looks pretty wild, and just even it feels like February was a year ago at this point. We are recording
Yeah.
this on Monday, April 13th. So today is like a really nice astrology day. I really like this.
Hmm.
I woke
Hmm.
up in the middle of the night wide awake, and I was laying there, and I do that because I have a dream practice that kind of involves like waking up and sitting with the dream. I was just
Mm.
wide awake, and then I was like, why am I awake? Why can't I get back to sleep? And then I went back to sleep, and when I woke up, I was like, that was the exact moment for Venus Jupiter. It was like the
Oh.
astrology woke me up just to
Hmm.
wake me up, nothing particular except to like get my attention. And it's just nice having like these little pockets of really nice astrology in the midst of some pretty wild astrology, which Uranus is definitely going to be a part of. So
Hmm. Yep.
when we talked just about Uranus and Gemini in general, but then because you do mundane, you are also looking at Uranus and Gemini connecting with Pluto and Aquarius. Can we just start there
Hmm.
about what
Hmm.
kind of conversation do those two planets have in air signs that are conversational signs, for lack of a better description?
Yeah. Yeah, so that the Uranus-Pluto cycle is very irregular and not very common. So when you look at the outers, because they move so slowly, the relationship with them spans centuries. So it's a very long, deep time type of focus that you have to do with any of these outer planets when you're looking at the connection with each other. So Uranus trine Pluto, that's something that hasn't happened since pretty much 100 years ago. So the 1920s is when we had the last iteration of that. And if you think about what happened in the 20s, it was all about air sign type of stuff. So that was when we got mass urbanization. Urbanization had been happening on a wide scale anyway, but it really took off then. But it was also combined with new technology. So I think of that as the decade of electrification. And it might not be like the first thing that comes to mind, but when you start looking, you think, oh, at the beginning of that decade, most people were in the dark, so to speak. So electrical power and electricity was not that common in the cities, more so, but certainly not in any rural areas. And by the end of that decade, almost everyone had power, certainly in the cities. It was also when everyone got a car. So at the beginning of the decade, very few households had one. And by the end, something like I think 70-80% of American households had a car. So that's pretty huge. And so it ties into that air, that movement, right? So the movement of people, the movement of ideas. And when you have people who are no longer literally in the dark at night, you get things like nightlife and you get things like cities just taking on a new character where they used to be pretty quiet. Well, I mean, maybe not, it's a city, but much more quiet when everything's dark and you can't do anything at night. And then all of a sudden, if you can see everything and walk around and meet people, everyone was out later. And you think of the Roaring Twenties, right? So all of the clubs, of course, that was the Prohibition era. So there was some illicit activity going on, which is also very mercurial. So I think that's and definitely flouting authority, which is the Uranian type of aspect there. So those are just some quick things that come to mind from the last time that Uranus was trine Pluto. And so you get, yeah, this sort of rapid intensification of all the Uranian revolutionary things. So revolutionary technology, breakthroughs in technology, and this sense that we're breaking out of the old, right? Like
Hmm.
we're now modern. We're not doing what we did for the last previous century, or if not many centuries. And it's all new and it's shiny and bright. And
Hmm.
yeah, so that is definitely kind of what we're headed into again in a big way.
Yeah, just like the social nature of like when you change those kinds of routines, like to get electrified light at home meant that you had access to all sorts of other things in life. You weren't
Mhm.
necessarily I think about it in following the moon. We use full moons as a way to kind of gather because that was the light that was on the path,
Mhm.
so that we could travel and we could, congregate at night. And the disruption of that by adding electric light, it disrupted this kind of stable nature of the way that we socialize, and really radicalized and then liberated, especially women,
Mhm.
women to be social. I saw a thing yesterday about cocktail rings. Like cocktail rings were a way to
Mhm.
communicate that you wanted a certain drink without having to say with your voice that you wanted a drink because it was prohibition. So you would
All
kind of
right.
like twinkle your cocktail rings, and they were designed to be real big to get the bartender's attention. And cocktails themselves were made to hide alcohol to make it look just like a fruity drink. So it's like all these
Mhm.
different, subversive ways to communicate what you want without using the traditional way that we would communicate, which would just be our voice. So I love that all that kind of happened with that Uranian liberation. And from that, there are harmful things that happen with that. And to me, that's like the symbol of Uranus has these two opposing crescent shapes at the top. And like on one hand, it can feel like it is liberating us. On the other hand, it can feel like it is injuring us at the same
Mhm.
time. It almost has this dual nature. And I think that time kind of tells our perspective of whether it was a subjectively good thing or a subjectively bad thing with Uranus.
Yeah. Yeah, and Uranus isn't good or bad. I mean,
Hmm.
in terms of the benefic or malefics, right? Of course, it's a modern planet. And so I think that I think we tend to think of, or maybe this is just my own bias, I think of the outers, so Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as a bit more malefic, but that could just be because when you look at the mundane astrology of their movements, they often bring about some pretty profound changes
Hmm.
and changes, scary and difficult often for
Hmm.
large groups of people, especially, and certainly individuals as well. But at its core, it's not good or bad. It's just these principles of disruption and breakthrough
Hmm.
and change and innovation. And those can often be, yes, very great things and needed things. But they can also bring about, very difficult periods. And often
Hmm.
it's through the difficulty and at the end of it, then things kind of settle and get reordered. But that period of disruption is often difficult for people
Hmm.
in the heat of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you don't break free because you're comfortable. You break free
No.
because you're compelled to, right?
Yes, you have
Uh,
to. Yeah,
yeah.
there's no you just can't stand it anymore. And that's very Uranian. This
Mm.
I have to be free. Like I just
Hmm.
have to get out of here.
Well, and then
Yeah.
that first decan of Gemini, that it's represented in the Rider-Waite-Smith with the Eight of Swords, and it
Mhm.
shows like a person that is looks like they're exiled, right? They're outside. They're blindfolded. They're kind of loosely bound. They have swords at their back, and there's like a village or castle way far behind them. And I liken it to just the Garden of Eden story. A lot of people do. It's like they received knowledge that they maybe shouldn't have had, and that
Mhm.
made them aware of their own existence, and that then separated them from, like, it's like the being in womb and then going through the birth channel and then being born. Like, you can't
Mhm.
ever go back to the womb. So having the awareness of existence is that, like, just like sudden disruption of what the Eight of Swords shows is just like, I can't ever unknow what I know. And that's what I wonder
Mhm.
about with Uranus going into Gemini, especially connecting with that Pluto, is like, what is the what liberation will we have from whatever information we receive during this transit? That's the kind of the frightening point on this side of it, at least. Maybe we'll
Mhm.
be thankful for it on the other side of it, but coming up, it's like, I feel like a secret's about to drop, or a
Yeah.
bunch of them, or just a realization's about to happen. And it's a little disconcerting on this side of it.
Mhm. It is, yeah. And I mean, I think generally, if we could pick a sign for Uranus to rule, and I don't do that because again, I focus more on
Mm-hmm.
traditional astrology, and so I don't give rulership to Uranus. But I feel like, sorry, modern astrologers, but much more so than Aquarius, I think Uranus and Gemini. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
at least very comfortable there.
Yeah.
Uranus was discovered in Gemini, so that's something in
Mm-hmm.
1781. And I just feel like it can do so much more in Gemini than in other signs that are more aligned with Uranus's character.
Mm-hmm.
So I that's just kind of my intuition about it is I think that at least certainly more so than Taurus. So we've had Uranus and Taurus for the last 7, 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
and that has not been comfortable, especially for those of us who are more fixed in our natal charts,
Mm-hmm.
but also for the world. Taurus likes things stable and steady and fixed, and Uranus literally flies in the opposite direction and disrupts all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where things started, I think, to get really uncomfortable on the world stage, and now things have, descended into all sorts of just madness.
Yeah.
Not that they didn't already. We always get
We're
these
just
these
aware of it,
periods.
definitely.
Very aware of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, going back to what you said about like what are we gonna know?
Mm-hmm.
There with because of the Pluto trine, the implication is that it's gonna be dark and it's gonna
Mm.
be very heavy and it's dredging things up from the underworld, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that we not funny that we got of course the Epstein files come to mind, right? So
Right.
that happened at the beginning of this year. Now Uranus has been, I guess, widely trying Pluto for a while, and it's been getting closer and not. It will really be quite close for the next pretty much the rest of the decade, so the next 4 years or so. But it was certainly in play back when those files came out, even if it wasn't by degree, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
if you give it 15 to 20 degrees, which Richard Tarnas in, his work Cosmos and Psyche is talking about the time scales of the outer planets, especially, and he gives them quite a wide orb
Yeah.
because these are things that happen over many years and decades even.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely a play, and that is a prime example of a Uranus trine Pluto type of event where it dredged up all this horrible information, and then what's happened with that? It seems like nothing. I do think there's some things under the surface, but because of the way that the world has gone since then, we've had some very big distractions. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that that event is over by any means, but it is going to take years to continue to go through that underworld and to continually have those revelations. And so that I guess is sadly on my bucket list, not my bucket list, my bingo
Yeah.
card, we'll say,
Yeah.
of things that, keep watching for that because that was very clearly aligned with that
Mm-hmm.
transit.
Well, last summer, for the majority of the summer, we did have that
Hmm.
entrance into it. And so that's what I wonder, like, at the first ingress of an outer planet into a new sign, you get this
Hmm.
rumbling, and then they'll retrograde
Hmm.
back and be like,
Hmm.
just kidding, I'm going to go, like,
Uh,
go take care of this mess. And then they go back in. And so for this one, once Uranus goes into Gemini, it's not going to retrograde back into Taurus again for our lifetime, right?
mhm.
And so what happened last summer it's like it shocked the ground a little bit for things to be dislodged, and then
Hmm.
it went back and hid in another sign, and that's like the what you said about it seems like nothing's really happening. I think that's I think it will be a flood or an electrical storm once it goes back in, especially with the Epstein files because of that. Because I think it's in the zeitgeist, it's in our consciousness. Like we are all aware that they would not be doing so much to suppress the story, include like start a war to out popularize this horrible thing. And like you said, it's Pluto, it's dark. Like we're talking about the like enslavement of another human. That's ultimately
Hmm.
what this is. And like that is
Hmm.
like the darkest thing that you can do to another person is like have
Hmm.
absolute control. And so I think that we will get that realization, but I feel like it'll be tangential to power, because I think of power in Pluto, power
Hmm.
in Saturn sign,
Hmm.
and then the information from Uranus. And when I think about Uranus as like the myth, and a lot of people think of Prometheus as opposed to Uranus, the god, and like Prometheus as stealing the fire and giving it to man. I agree with you with the association with Gemini. It's like Gemini is the pollinator of all these of information and connection. And so stealing the fire to give it to another world feels very mercurial, feels that
Hmm.
Gemini kind of flavor. And so I wonder if the disruption of Uranus in a pollinator sign like Gemini, of just spreading these ideas, connecting with the dark information coming from Pluto, will be kind of our first taste of Uranus. But then it will, move past and then be connecting to all these other things simultaneously. So
Hmm.
outside of Pluto, like how do you try to describe Uranus and Gemini just as like a single unaspected sort of a transit?
Hmm. Yeah, so it's this period of rapid rapid,
Mm-hmm.
specifically focused around technology and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So we have lots of examples of the previous periods when Uranus was in Gemini of the rapid spread of ideas
Mm-hmm.
and yeah. So going back to 1439 to 1447, printing
Mm-hmm.
press was invented.
Oh wow.
So that's pretty on the nose, right? So
Yeah.
you have this revolutionary new technology that is
Mm-hmm.
all about the spread of information and ideas. And that happened in that transit. Uranus takes 84 years to go around the sun, so every 84 years we get Uranus and Gemini. And so after that, the next one, this was between 1523 and 1530. That was Martin Luther's German language Bible translation. And we all know what
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther went on to do. So he published some major works during that period that then led to, the schism and all the things that happened with the church then. So again, this idea of these radical ideas and
Mm-hmm.
information that he's spreading. So that's very in keeping with it. The one after that, the King James Bible came out. That was 1606 to 1614, that transit. I'm skipping ahead. I just wanted to kind of talk about this. Oh yeah, because I was looking at this, over the weekend really. And I was struck by how many very important books came out. So since the
Hmm.
printing press was invented during a Uranus and Gemini transit, then in 1690 to 1698, John Locke published his
Mm-hmm.
book. So the father of liberalism. So this is where we
Yeah.
got liberal democracy, the idea of that, which at the time would have been completely revolutionary, right? Like this
Yeah.
was not something that anyone had maybe they tried way back when, but yeah, but
There's
not
no
for
evidence of, at least.
no, yeah, like I mean, you go back to ancient Rome and stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, this was the modern version of it, right? And then in the one after that, 1774 to 1782, Thomas Paine. So he was,
Mm-hmm.
of course, one of the founding fathers, and he came out with some very important works that, these Enlightenment ideas that he'd built upon that became built into the Constitution of the U.S. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, during that one was when the U.S. was founded. So the
Mm-hmm.
Declaration of Independence itself is a Uranus and Gemini
Uranian. Yeah.
document. Yeah. Which is why there is that link between Uranus and Gemini and, well, war for the US in particular. We can
Mm.
get to that maybe, but just going with these ideas, the time after that was 1858 to 1866. On the Origin of Species was published by Charles
Mm.
Darwin. So
Mm-hmm.
another pretty significantly revolutionary book writing. And then the last time was 1941 to 1949. So of course World War II, but there were a lot of these were like the books you read in school, like were often published in the
Mm-hmm.
classic literature. So things like 1984 by George Orwell, or yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just have to uh, throw that one out. Animal Farm as well came
Mm-hmm.
out then. Anne Frank's Diary. But then just a bunch of like Ayn Rand published The Fountainhead. Albert Camus, he wrote
Mm-hmm.
The Stranger then. So there
Stranger.
was yeah, there was a lot of pretty significant books that came out, and a lot of it was reflecting on the war and the post-war period. So yeah, that was the last time that Uranus was in Gemini. And so when I look back at that history going back, several centuries, it's like we got these texts, these written materials
Mm-hmm.
that had these revolutionary ideas in it that went on to trigger like profound changes in society and governments and nations and all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. So I've been thinking about that for the last few days, and just because we don't know what it is yet because we haven't
Yeah.
really gone through this transit. But I've been thinking, like, what does it look like now in the 21st century? What is the modern printing press? And then I thought, is
Mm-hmm.
it AI? And then I thought maybe. But the thing of it is it's yeah, there's going to be something that gets published, and what does that look like in a world that's just flooded with all of this information, and people don't read books so much anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be really interesting. And are we going to get a new form? Maybe it's not actually a pen to paper book anymore. Maybe it's some other type of media, but that still has some sort of profound effect in
Mm-hmm.
reshaping, our world.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder like the rise of psychedelics and the rise of interest in lucid dreaming, like I do, or even astral projection, and looking back to see like governments around the world have already implemented a lot of these, techniques of finding ways to communicate outside traditional communication methods. And so
Hmm.
that's what I wonder, like, is it AI or is it this other, like, connecting human consciousness with other forms of travel? you know
Hmm.
um and like I think of it just like Star Trek and just like beam me up, Scotty. Is it going to be something like that? Because yeah, we integrate literature differently now than we did even just 10 years ago, much
Hmm.
less 84 years ago. So I'm getting the sense that it's going to be an actual technology, unless,
Hmm.
because I was like, oh, everybody that has their book ready, like go ahead and publish it in Uranus and Gemini, because chances are it's probably going to have some sort of revolutionary event. But I feel like more so it'll be a technology.
Yeah.
But let's talk about war, because that's just nice and
Sure.
sunny. We look at, I think of like the Second World War as looking at it as a time, of tragedy, but there was so much that came, at least for the liberation and the empowerment of women in the
Hmm.
workplace and redefining gender roles and education. All this stuff came out, really positive stuff that I benefit from now, living in 2026. And so I
Hmm.
think about war as it is, when you crack something open, you don't have control of what comes out. And you might want to crack something open to destroy it, but we are always constantly in a cycle of creation and destruction. And so other things are created. And that's like the silver lining of war, is that you can have these positive things happen eventually, even if it takes generations for it to happen. Not
Yeah.
to, dismiss the absolute tragedy and subjugation of people and torture and generational trauma that has ensued when you do actively pursue war. But it does seem like Uranus and Gemini, especially, in the US, and I'm a US citizen, that it's just baked into our chart, and so we express it that way. We're always at war, honestly, but like the big wars, I guess, which is
Yeah.
kind of an unfortunate thing to say. It's like the higher wars usually have a Uranus and Gemini bent. So, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think yeah, you're right on the money needing to differentiate between just war with a little w and war with a capital W. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I guess they all have capital W's, but
Yeah.
when we look at the Uranus and Gemini period, it tends to be these era-defining wars.
Mm-hmm.
So wars happen all the time. Like if you go online and pull up a list of wars, it's just endless, which
Yeah.
is really depressing, actually. But if we focus on Uranus and Gemini, for the US in particular, of course, as we mentioned, so, in 1776, that was the Declaration of Independence, and that was the formation of the US. And in that chart has Uranus and Gemini with Mars in the seventh
Hmm.
house of the
Right,
Sibley
right.
chart, right? So it
Hmm.
is literally baked into your DNA as a nation.
Very loudly.
Very loud, not quiet at all.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that the next two times, after that the US has been a nation, that we've had these era-defining wars. So that was
Hmm.
the American Revolutionary War, of course, that led to that,
Hmm.
that point. The time after that was the Civil War, the American Civil War, and that was Uranus and Gemini as well. And then World War II happened in the Uranus and Gemini period after that.
Hmm.
So very significant wars that rejigged the map, so to speak. And they were very loud. And so now so I think that's why astrologers and, everyone else looking at this situation in Iran right now, and, the astrologers looking at the transits, thinking, well, is this going to be the next era-defining war?
Hmm.
We don't want it to be, but the astrology suggests that sometime in the next 7 years or so, yeah, there is going to
Hmm.
be, if not this one, there will be a conflict. I resist the World War III analogy, just because I don't think that it's apt, and I don't think that in this very air-focused age that you get war the same way. We already see we
Hmm.
don't get it the same way now. We're getting air wars as opposed to, the earth wars that happened
Hmm.
in previous centuries. Literally drone warfare, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the norm now, and that is like an air-based technology. So, yeah, that's war. I sadly don't think we get out of this probably decade, certainly not this transit of Uranus and Gemini, without a nuclear detonation of some kind. And I'm not saying
Wow.
that to scare people. And I also don't think that it has to be in a war situation. It could
Hmm.
be. That certainly makes sense. The last time, yes, that was World War II. That's when that happened. But it could also be tied into the new technology that Uranus and Gemini is going to bring. So,
Hmm.
nuclear technology, especially given what's happening around fossil fuels and energy
Hmm.
in this world, right? So, at the beginning of this year, before this war happened, I was looking at all the AI stuff, right, and thinking, wow, like the demands of electricity for AI are huge. There's this mad rush to build data centers for AI, but behind that, you have to have a power grid that can
Hmm.
support those data
Yeah.
centers. And so before anything happened with Iran, I was thinking, wow, we're really going to have to rejig the global energy sector
Mm.
to power all of this, which very much is in keeping with what happened the last time we had the Uranus trine Pluto in the 1920s, right? With the electrification of
Mm.
the West in a big way. So we're going to be kind of faced with that again. And I was thinking, well, nuclear power is probably going to be what it comes to, because um, oil just seems like it is on its way out. Now it's certainly not over. As we can
Hmm.
see, the oil is still king in many ways, and there's going to be lots of work around that for the foreseeable future. But I think this is probably impressing upon most nations the need to have diversified energy economies. And so some way to generate power, and we can't rely on the old earth-based
Yeah.
uh, methods anymore. Literally, oil comes from the earth, right? And so I
Hmm.
think that's going to be maybe phased out. It will be a long process, but yeah. So my money is on nuclear power of some kind, just becoming sort of the backstop, I guess, towards the global energy needs.
Mm.
Now, so when you talk about nuclear detonation, when you're working with nuclear technology, detonations can be used for power, or can be used for I guess for technological advances. So I'm hoping that the nuclear stuff that I see is a potential is going to be more in terms of scientific improvements and
Mm.
breakthroughs of that nature, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to being used to kill people, which,
Yeah.
we don't need more of that, but it could also happen.
Yeah. What also came up when you were speaking was I think just because we are so connected as like global citizens, as I'm in the States, you're in Canada, and we've
Hmm.
never met in person, but we can just like pick up and talk about these things.
Yep.
Um, And it happens like whenever you travel, you just meet people and you realize we're not so different. We just had Artemis 2 go up and
Hmm.
circle the moon, and all they were doing was like reflecting back that like we are one. Like there's so much blackness around, there's so much darkness around the earth, and
Hmm.
yet the earth is just one. And to me, it's like this, it's like in physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And
Hmm.
so with this sort of power vacuum that is being, concentrated down to, less and less people that are more and more desperate to hold on to their power, whether it's money or political power or whatever it is, you have this equal and opposite reaction of diversification of people realizing that we're all kind of the same, we're all fairly similar. And so I wonder if when you were talking about the ways that we fight wars or differently, I think that, and I don't know, but I think that people within countries are starting to be like, I don't hate Iran or the Iranian people. It's my government that is fighting your government. It's like with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, you do have some like um, that tribalism between countries, but it's less so now than it was 100 years ago. Like it was like easy to have propaganda to just hate the Japanese or hate Japanese people in the US, but that like try to do that now, like that's not really possible now because it's just the diversification of people getting information from a variety of sources. You don't have a monolith of information like you did even 20 years ago. I feel like it kind of diffuses the monolithic power and helps change the tone of war so that America isn't fighting Iran, it's the American government and the Iranian government. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like it's
Yes.
below that, the people that constitute those countries don't have this energetic hatred towards each other. They're kind of like, man, I don't know, I
Hmm.
mean, even just seeing in Ireland, they started with the farmers, protesting. But then over the past couple of days, all of the country of Ireland has kind of come together as individual people to protest what is happening. But it was started by the farmers, which feels like this crisis point of Uranus and Taurus, and farmers coming up in revolt just feels very on the nose. So that there can be fundamental change for what happens. So I just wanted to, as you were speaking that, I was like, the way that we
Hmm.
consider war and we think about war just as cultures has definitely changed since the last time Uranus was in Gemini, and I think that that's an improvement.
Definitely. You look at, so I think one of the things, a good keyword for Uranus and Gemini would be like liberatory information.
Mm-hmm.
And, at its best, the internet and our interconnectedness through that is all about having access to all the information you could possibly want, and some you probably
Mm-hmm.
don't want. But because of that, yeah, you can't be kept in the dark as much, or really
Yeah.
focused on one narrow line of information, which is really easily propagandized. Now, propaganda is rife all over the internet as well, and it's
Sure.
almost like too much information then
Mm-hmm.
results in just this big muck, right? Where it's impossible to know what the truth is. So I think a big part of Uranus and Gemini will be trying to figure out discernment of information through all that. So, yes, it's a liberatory technology in the sense of it. You can access anything you want just in a moment. But what are you going to do with that? And
Mm.
we've had a few decades now to kind of play with that, and now it seems like there needs to be some intent, I guess, and some conscious
Hmm.
application of that more so than maybe we've seen so far. Yeah.
So let's throw in the other outer because Neptune
Hmm.
is in early degrees
Hmm.
Aries, which is
Hmm.
going to be, in connection with Uranus and Pluto. And that's different than it was when it was in Pisces. The Pisces Taurus connection has a very different expression than the Aries
Yes.
Gemini connection. So can you
Yeah.
fold that in? How does Neptune add some sprinkle to the mix?
Yeah. So what I found interesting when I was going back through the many centuries, looking at Uranus and Gemini, I noticed the relationship with Neptune. So
Hmm.
in the last iteration of 1941 to 49 of Uranus and Gemini, it was trine Neptune in Libra. But that was the first time that it had been in a trine relationship with Neptune. Prior to that, going back many centuries, it was in a
Hmm.
square with Neptune. And Neptune was either in Virgo or Pisces.
Yeah.
And this was true through going back to, God, what is it, like 1100 or something that I had to go all the way back to find a different relationship. Now, this will tie into just the synodic cycle between those planets and how they
Right.
connect. And it's kind of like what I mentioned at the beginning of this deep time where you have to go back many centuries to get a bigger picture of how these planets interact with one another. But suffice to say that, the connection between Neptune and Uranus has been square up until, the 1940s, and then
Mm-hmm.
it changed to a trine, and now it's going to be sextile. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's like a lesser type of benefic support, I guess we'll say. So if you think of it, when it was square, it was, that aspect is of Mars, so it was more of a conflicting type of energy. So you had all these hopes and dreams and visions and illusions and delusions of Neptune kind of squaring off with the liberatory impulses and the revolution and the disruption and chaos of Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you got things like innovations in technology and information technology and all these revolutionary ideas that were put on paper and then triggered, wars and other, just massive changes in society. And so now that relationship is more cooperative, and it's quieter too. So a
Mm-hmm.
sextile is not nearly as loud of an aspect as a trine or a square, of course. So Neptune will still be there, but will have less influence, I guess, over the proceedings. It really seems like Pluto is stepping into the dominant,
Mm,
there because it's
as
in
it
trine
does.
to Uranus. Yeah, yeah. There's no ignoring Pluto. Pluto
Mm-hmm.
is kind of in the background. In all of those centuries I mentioned, it was in either in conjunct or it was just more of like sextile relationships
Mm-hmm.
with Uranus. So now is stepping to the forefront in a big way. So yeah, so with Neptune, I mean, there's certainly going to be that underpinning of Neptunian energy, and we've been in that Saturn-Neptune conjunction that happened in February.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going away anytime soon, but I also get the sense that it's like all the stuff that came out of that is gonna fade away or rather be operating kind of over here. And then the Uranus Pluto stuff seems almost like
Mm,
they're kind of going to be like two very different things happening. And maybe that's just me looking at, Uranus being in Gemini, being a double-bodied
yeah.
sign where things are kind of happening concurrently, and
Mm-hmm.
they may be related or they may not be, or maybe, the connections between them won't be obvious at
Yeah.
first. Yeah, so
Yeah, because
Neptune,
sextiles are so nuanced, like
yeah.
it's hard to even find. But then so is um Neptune and Aries. When you said something about like what do we do with it? What do we do with
Hmm.
this change?
Hmm.
And that's what like pinged Neptune in my mind. I was like Neptune and Aries may find it that we get to be inventive or creative because we don't know exactly what our individual role, being Aries, having a vision, but kind of a diluted vision. I feel like it is going to be happening over on the sides. Like it's going to take time
Hmm.
for that idea of what our individual role is and to take form so that then it can connect a little bit more electrically. Like the electrical connection will be more clearly defined later on in the transit
Hmm.
with Uranus there. It's almost like it's its own little, storm happening while Uranus
Hmm.
and Pluto are over here, like making like really accelerated, innovative, chaotic, eccentric, disruptive, cracking open all of that stuff. Like as they do
Hmm.
it, Neptune is over there like, come back to me in 5 minutes, come back to me in 5 years or whatever it is,
Hmm.
just like I've got to work some things out before I have an idea. I just wondered what you thought about the connection of that. When I was looking at the names of Uranus, they were going to call it Neptune, and they just changed it over to the next discoverable planet. It has like a bunch of names, which also feels very mercurial. That it like the name itself hasn't really landed. Um,
Fun fact about the name, it was also almost called George.
yes.
Um, so William Herschel discovered it, an English, astronomer, discovered it in his backyard, this crazy contraption. It's quite a fun story, actually. And he was a true, loyalist to the crown,
Hmm.
and so he wanted to name it after King George.
Hmm.
And so in the British astronomical books, anyway, of that era, and for many years after, it was called like Georgium Sidum, which is a Georgia's
Uh-huh.
star. And the rest of the, international astronomical community was not a fan. And they were like,
Yeah.
no, you're not calling it George. You're not calling it George's star. But I just find that so funny because it is
Yeah.
like how Uranian, right? Like this guy was like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to call this after the King of England. And everyone else said, no, you're not.
No.
But anyway, yeah, it took a while for it to kind of adapt to its or adopt its current name,
Hmm.
Uranus. And yeah, the outer planet names, Pluto seems to kind of fit. Neptune not as much, and Uranus kind of. Prometheus, I think, is definitely a good analogy for Uranus. But yeah, it is definitely very mercurial that
Yeah.
it was that trickster aspect,
Hmm.
which is something that we need to keep in mind too with Gemini
Mm.
being ruled by Mercury, which is a trickster and is elusive. And
Hmm.
so there's kind of this sense of really like things are going to shift or things are going to happen, and it's going to be tricky to kind of sort
Hmm.
out what that is in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna start calling Uranus Curious George. That's its new name if I
Also, fun fact, the Curious George books came out during the Uranus and Gemini period.
Oh,
That's
there
when
you
they
go.
were first published in the 40s, yeah, 1940s.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
that fits perfectly.
That
There we
fits.
go.
Awesome. Cool. New memes to make on my list.
Yeah, there we go.
What was I gonna say? Oh, something came into mind. I I have Uranus in the first house, and so I've always really
Mm,
liked Uranus. And then when you were
mhm,
going through the dates, my family immigrated from Austria in the early 1600s because they were
okay.
persecuted Lutherans
Mm,
after the schism.
mhm.
And then my family were silk farmers. They were silkworm farmers in
Oh
coastal
wow.
Georgia. And they were uh, also fighters in the Revolutionary War. So I'm a direct descendant of the signers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And then because I lived in the South, I also had family that fought in the Civil War because I was in Georgia. And then I had family that fought in the Second World War. And so I've always considered that Uranus transit kind of personal, but it's the only planet that I have in the first house. It's like there
Mm,
is something there's some sort of genetic memory that I'm carrying forward
mhm.
that has always been very curious about Uranus. And that wasn't what I wanted to share, but I was like, I can't think of what I was going to share, so I'll just throw that in there. Um, oh, that's what I wanted. So, because Uranus is going to be in Gemini, it's ruled by Mercury. Mercury goes retrograde more than any other planet so that it can kind
Mhm,
of, keep track with
mhm,
the sun. It goes retrograde 3 times a year.
mhm,
And this year, and at the ingress, it's going to be retrograde in mostly water. But
mm.
how do you reconcile the retrograde periods of Mercury while Uranus is in Gemini? Have you looked at that cycle? Like, is it like way more fucked up when that happens, or is it just a way for us to slow down and process all the accelerated change that happens during this 8-year transit?
hmm I haven't looked into that too closely yet, but my initial read on it is that it really ties into the trickster nature, the double-bodied
Mm,
nature of Mercury, that it's constantly switching directions, and switching between, being more of a benefic or a malefic type of force, depending on who it's connecting to in the
mm-hmm,
sky. And so with Uranus in Gemini, then I think that it's just going to just amp up the amount of shiftiness that we're going to get out of that
mm,
transit. Like, I don't think it's going to have any one flavor because it can't, just because of the nature
right.
of Mercury. I guess yes, there's going to be sort of an overall shape that is going to have, and we can kind of see it, looking back at the history and the examples that have come out of it. But in the moment, especially, I think it's going to feel very changeable, and
Mm,
very unstable and very scattered. So I think
mm,
that there's going to be that sense of not being able to pin it down because you can't. Like with Mercury, it's just
mm-hmm,
constantly on the move. It's here one day and then now it's gone and now it's changed direction and it's the planet that's the most hidden by the sun, right? Because it travels so close to the sun,
mm-hmm.
it's often invisible.
Yeah,
On a physical level, it's actually a really hard planet to see because it's always very close to the sun. So unless you have really good gear, you often just can't see it.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of how it will likely factor in. Um, the retrograde periods may just give us a moment to process things, and maybe we'll
Hmm.
actually come to welcome that actually.
Yeah.
To maybe it will give us that sense of, okay, now we get to revisit everything that's happened over the last few months and do a bit maybe of integration,
Mm.
as opposed to just constantly traveling at the breakneck pace that I think that we'll certainly already maybe be feeling about how things are going, just events happening, just yeah, at a rapid fire.
Yeah. What do you think about just space travel in general? I mean, like the name Uranus means like forethought, but it's like considered like this the deity of the sky. And so I've
Mhm.
wondered that about just exploration and having access to exploring space more so in that 8 year period, which we just saw, Artemis circle around
Mhm.
the moon.
Mhm.
And it was like kind of like this easy, no, not very uneventful, except for the fact that
Yeah.
what they were doing, smooth ride. And I wonder if that'll inspire people to like want to seek outside of the planet or go deep into the ocean, which is just as mysterious as
Mhm.
space. What are your thoughts just on space exploration?
Space exploration is definitely on my list of things that I think
Yeah.
we'll see more of in Uranus and Gemini. It just makes so much sense with that sort of that very innovative, heavily technology-based type of breakthrough that has to happen. So like the Artemis mission is a great example where we were testing old technology, but with new technology. Like, and it was almost
Mm,
not that it had been lost, but because it had been so long since we went to space, it was a little bit like, can we do this? Like, is this
yeah.
actually something we can
Like
do?
50 years? Was it something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was in the 70s was the last time that
Yeah.
the Apollo missions went up there. So yeah, so it was kind of like testing out what was previously yeah, what had kind of been lost. So yeah, I think space travel in general, and what happens with that, I'm not sure. There's been some weird stuff happening with the moon if you follow the news,
Hmm.
over the last few years. So things like there is a space race going on actually. So
Hmm.
and it's not getting the headline news at all. It kind of pops up every so often, like the Artemis, of course, it
Hmm.
gets headlines for a little bit. But I was thinking that, we just sent four people to space. That's like a big deal.
Hmm.
And but this stupid war going on, everyone's talking about, and the Artemis just was kind of like, oh, that's nice. And if anyone even cared, I don't know, it just didn't seem like it didn't get as much airtime as it felt
Mm,
like it should have, maybe. And certainly not like what was the vibe in the 1960s and 70s when we
right.
were sending people to space, and it was like that was what everyone was focused on.
Mm,
So that being said, yes, definitely there will be more space stuff over the next decade, we'll call it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But it's going to be interesting. So the space race that I heard is a lot of it's just focused so far on reflecting back, to Earth, and specifically
mm,
focused on setting up some kind of a network, or I mean, reinforcing the network of satellites that are
hmm.
surrounding the Earth for all of the information that has to flow, right? The other thing, and maybe this is just me going off on weird tangents, but in medical astrology, I know for sure Mercury rules tubes, so like the tubes of the
Mm,
body.
hmm.
Um, but if you think about what are the tubes of the earth, and then I started thinking about pipelines, and then I started thinking about internet cables,
Mm,
and the network of like deep sea internet cables that are, all around the earth, which are kind of like they're like the blood vessels of the earth. I don't know. This is
hmm.
this is going out there with the analogy, but it is they're tubes, right? Tubes.
Yeah.
Certainly, oil pipelines, those kind of fit, and
Mm-hmm.
those have come to the forefront with what's going on in Iran. But then these deep sea internet cables, and then knowing that there's this space race where, the network of satellites around the Earth are beaming down their information, concentrated in very specific areas. Like the main one is up in Svalbard in the Arctic, right? So up near the North Pole. And so there's this station basically that receives all this satellite information, and it flows down into the network of deep sea internet cables from there. So I was thinking about all of that, and how, number one, how that's really vulnerable, actually.
Hmm.
And then also how it seems like we're going to have to backstop that or expand that. And so there's going to have to be a lot more. This will be kind of like the new form of the Uranian technology that we saw in previous instances of it being in Gemini, where it was building out like radio networks and telegraph lines
Hmm.
and all of these information infrastructure things that had to happen for the flow of information. And so I think
Hmm.
that we're going to see a new version of that or an improved version. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that were just recently going through my mind with Mercury ruling tubes, which
Yeah.
sounds kind of silly, but yeah, I think there's something there.
Yeah, yeah. It made me think of just high-speed rail and,
Hmm.
moving people a lot quicker. Maybe it's not air flight, but maybe it is just like faster moving across land, which a lot of countries have and a lot of countries don't. Um, but then I'm wondering like what can people do just in their everyday life? You hear Uranus and Gemini, and a lot of it is kind of like preparing to hang out with like someone that is constantly inflamed by static electricity, right? It's kind of like,
Mm,
how am I gonna like center myself to be in a time period that has like this electrical change and disruption if I know it ahead of time? How do I prepare for something like that? And you said something about airtime, and I'm thinking about bandwidth, which is already a problem, especially if we have AI flooding information that is not helpful, but it's still information. As you get older, you realize you have less and less bandwidth for everything. And
hmm.
especially when you become a parent or, you have just complicated lives. The older you get, the more complicated your lives get. And so I'm just wondering, like, is that just going to be amplified with Uranus and Gemini? Or is that going to be the technologies that's created to help us simplify and focus the energy of the focus our attention towards things that were not so scattered? Like, is it going to have like an inverse reaction?
Hmm.
I feel like we're going to have access to so much more information, but we are already overwhelmed, and that's
Hmm.
why there's so much ignorance. Is because you're like, I can't pay attention to everything, so I'm not going to pay attention to anything. All
Hmm.
out to say, like, what advice do you have for people in preparation for this sort of a thing? And of course, it depends on where Uranus is in your chart. Maybe shows
Hmm.
where it will be, but just carte blanche. What kind of advice would you give in preparation?
Yeah, so I would say, of course, go back to your chart. It's always all about your chart. We've talked a
Hmm.
lot about, the large scale changes that Uranus and Gemini tends to bring to large groups of people and nations and things like that. But within that, there are individuals. And
Hmm.
even when things are crazy and not great for the world in general, there are people thriving, and
Yeah.
it is absolutely possible to do that. What I would say, yes, is look at where Gemini is in your chart and where your Mercury is, and get to know those really well. Be prepared for Uranus to disrupt that house and all the topics associated with it. So
Hmm.
trying to do things that will make you more adaptable. So Gemini is a mutable sign. It's go with the flow type of energy. So trying to find ways that you can be more adaptable and mutable, if you will,
Hmm.
in dealing with that energy, knowing that things are gonna, like the ground is gonna get kind of taken out from underneath your feet in that area over the next 8 years. So what are you gonna do to prepare for it? And sometimes it's literally just being aware that it's gonna happen, and then
Yeah.
that so that you'll be blindsided, but hopefully not as blindsided as if you
Hmm.
hadn't looked ahead and thought, that's probably gonna go crazy. So that is what I would look at for sure. And then yeah, just where your natal Mercury is and where how you tend to communicate and your intake of information. I think that's really key as well is going with AI, but even before that, this onslaught of information is too much. And I've actually seen a lot of people and myself to some degree experiment with using these LLM AI models for discernment to try and filter out all this stuff. Now, of course, then you're trusting that the information it's giving you is what you should
Hmm.
listen to. So I think this will be a time period where learning how to discern information and critically think is going to be more important than ever be. And I think that's what we're in danger of losing if you
Hmm.
rely too much on these large language models, because again, you're giving that function to something else, to an external
Hmm.
source, and losing the
Yeah.
ability to be able to do it yourself. So discernment is key, and adaptability, I think, and just knowing that it has that sort of scattered and decentralized nature. That there's just going to be lots of things happening all at once, and so maybe just changing your mindset away from sort of maybe older forms where it's very, I keep using that analogy of earth-based versus air-based, but it really
Mm.
does feel like we're shifting from that. And so the things that are very earth heavy and heavy and grounded, their
Hmm.
foundations are kind of already being shook up, if not totally broken. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I saw a picture that someone made, and they had just like made it with like tape and paper, but they had made a phone holder and taped it to their kitchen wall. Like we used to have telephones in our
Yeah.
kitchen, and they would just put
Yeah.
their phone up. And I was like, that is just brilliant,
Yeah.
just to like set your phone off, and like there, that's where the phone lives. It doesn't live, like tucked under your thigh, or like in
Hmm.
your back pocket or in your purse or like in your lap or popped up. It's not always with you. It's not like your little
Hmm.
personal robot. It has a space. I think of just like the mindless scrolling, and that is like it's a physical response that we get from the dopamine of scrolling. And so
Yep.
I think in preparation, you could start to reduce that for yourself, because I feel like there's going to be so much of that just everywhere anyway, that
Hmm.
like what you can do just in your personal habits is just try to reduce the amount of information you consume. And yeah, like using trusted models to be able to like filter in and help discernment. I think it's a really interesting idea. Um, just because I feel like it's going to be too much. It already feels like it's too
Hmm.
much, and we're not even there yet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've certainly just taken a huge step back in terms of the amount of information I try to
Hmm.
consume on a daily basis because it is too much. And I think over the
Hmm.
last few years, I was on a steady diet kind of all day long
Hmm.
of everything. And it's too much. I can't focus.
Yeah.
So having focus will be something that more so than ever is just so important. And what are you focusing on, right?
Mm.
Like your
Hmm.
attention is kind of has been weaponized. So if you
Hmm.
think about all the information coming at you all day long and how we are like literally in the information age. I mean, they've been saying that for decades, right? But it's what do you do now with that? And I
Yeah.
think kind of coming back to what we were talking about of the so now what? So now what about like what do we do with that? The taking
Hmm.
action. Maybe that's where Neptune and Aries, as you said, comes into play because that is that sort of action impulse. Like what are we
Hmm.
going to actually do as opposed to just mindlessly, taking in and reading, but not, not outputting anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, where do you have Uranus natally? Do you want to share?
Yeah, it's in my eighth house, and I'm going to be real honest. It's kind of a big question mark, as the eighth
Hmm.
house tends to be.
Hmm.
It's pretty conjunct my south node, so it's kind of I don't know what it's doing, honestly.
Yeah.
This is me, maybe looking like I'm a terrible astrologer, but I
Eighth house is
have.
tricky.
It really is. And it's,
Yeah.
so it's in Sagittarius. It's conjunct the South Node and co-present with Neptune in that house.
Hmm.
And it isn't really connected with my chart.
Mm.
As I look at it again, I don't have anything else in any of the mutable signs. So
Hmm.
those are my only ones. I'm much more cardinal and then fixed, mostly cardinal though. So when I look at that, it's just kind of I don't know.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, what is it doing? I mean, it is. Yeah, it's working under the cover, right? So
Yeah.
it's working up in the eighth house. A lot of it, and this is very kind of maybe boring, but a lot of it has come out in terms of like my partner's resources. So
Hmm.
like very mundane type of learning to deal with Uranian chaos and disruption
Hmm.
coming from a partner, right?
Yeah.
And me having to kind of bring in some stability to that on my own
Mm.
sense, right? Because that part of my chart is quite unstable. And so yeah, that has been, I think, the most obvious way that has kind of played out for me personally. And I mean, this is now I'm headed into my Uranus opposition with
Hmm.
and most of us I think of this age are, of course, because we have Uranus in Sagittarius. So Uranus and Gemini will be our Uranus oppositions, which is going to shake up our natal
Hmm.
Uranus placements. And so for me, it's a money house in a big way. There's other stuff too. So
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to be going through my second and opposing what's in my eighth, yeah, I'm thinking that, diversifying my income and just being prepared for finances to be less than stable, which is scary. But it is what it is, and at least I can see that kind of coming down the road, so to speak, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's gone through your first house, you know. Do you have
Yep.
any Uranus on the ascendant stories?
Yeah, what's funny is I became a mother, and I
Hmm.
think that is honestly it's not probably what you would necessarily think of. But if I think about that time period of Uranus going through Taurus, my first, yeah, I went from just being, married but without children to like now I have two children and I'm a
Hmm.
mother, and that was a complete radical transformation of who I am, especially from who I was if I think back to when I was a kid and I swore I was never going to have kids for so many years. And then all
Hmm.
of a sudden it was like Uranus went through my first and I said, no, actually I do want to do that. And I did it. And here I am on the other side, and now it's going to go through my second, and kids are expensive, so
Yeah.
that's yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It's going to just kind of bring some disruption to my finances, but that is just how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like just Uranus, you know, especially coming through like a money house. It's like the skill house too. So,
Hmm.
and having just, if we choose the name Uranus, meaning forethought, having, I've experienced Uranus as having those lightning bolt ideas that come through
Hmm.
in unexpected ways. And preparation from that, if you have any sort of meditative practice, meditation is like so good to sharpen your brain
Hmm.
and to receive
Hmm.
that sort of information. So I look at Uranus going through the second as kind of like maybe you're going to have some really brilliant ideas come through that just are there to support your skill. And it will diversify and it will make it unstable, but it's also going to make it really exciting and liberating from the ideas of how you think you should work versus like now what you're going to do.
Hmm.
I have Uranus in Scorpio, and my son is in Taurus opposite it. So I'm finishing my Uranus opposition, and I
Hmm.
absolutely loved it. Granted, it was in fixed signs versus mutable, so it's a different story. But I was really scared of it before it started. And now that
Hmm.
I'm on the other end of it, I'm like, man, that was like such a wild ride. I'm ready to get off of the ride, but it was definitely worth it. So if you have Uranus in Sagittarius, welcome to a brand new adventure. uh, it's um, it's it usually happens with like the Saturn opposition to kind of like that
Hmm.
beginning of that. So there's other things that kind of make it a bit more somber and like
Hmm.
serious, but it is kind of this like threshold of becoming yourself in a way that I don't think other markers in life really hone in like the Uranus half return or the Uranus opposition. I think it's really crystallizing like who you actually are, and that's really
Hmm.
exciting. Like you get to that point
Hmm.
and you're like, I'm not this person and I'm not whatever my future self is. Like I am right now who exactly I'm
Hmm.
supposed to be. And it's like such a relief, you know, because then you're able to just be yourself, like almost for the first time ever. Not necessarily for everyone, but it has that kind of sense of like, finally, you know? So I'm excited
Hmm.
for you.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, and it did tie into being an astrologer publicly, I would say
Mm.
too. So, I
Hmm.
mean, as much as it was about, me becoming a mom, it also was about me becoming a public astrologer.
Hmm.
So, I often look at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which was on my midheaven back in
Mm.
2020, as why I became an
Wow.
astrologer. And it definitely that was part of it. But Uranus was, in my first house. It wasn't on my ascendant yet, but it was
Hmm.
getting there. And by the end of that, yeah, here I am, right?
Yeah.
So another huge radical shift in like my identity and who I am and who I am
Hmm.
publicly, because, even though I'd been sort of a quiet weirdo for many, many years, my whole life really, it was kind of that Uranus going over my ascendant and through my first house that made me just not care as much.
Hmm.
I didn't feel like I had to hide it. In
Yeah.
fact, I was gonna advertise it, and I do work in a very, boring corporate day job where when people find out I'm an astrologer, there's two reactions, right? They're either like, oh, that's nice, and then they want to change the
Hmm.
subject immediately because they think it's
Hmm.
BS and they don't want to talk about it, or they're excited and then they want me to do a reading for them, which is great.
Yeah.
And I also like to read for my coworkers because I got to work with them. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, Uranus can bring, like, again, going back to the liberation aspect of it. And best case scenario for it is it's gonna bring some sort of freedom and space in your life.
Mm.
And if it's just to be who you are, I think that's great, and that
Yeah.
we all could certainly stand to do that more. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an authenticity about Uranus that I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can. try to stay in a relationship against your better judgment, or try to perform in a job that you hate, or try to have a style that just doesn't fit comfortably on you, eventually you're going to just outgrow the performance aspect of that and just crack open. And
Hmm.
part of what's cracking open is just this, like we all have different birth charts because we're all born at different points when the sky looked very differently. So it's like we all have our very specific authenticity, and that comes out like through Uranus, and I'm just excited for all the Uranus and Sagittarian generation to like kind of bust out through their own authenticity. So
Hmm.
I'm going to share your website again as we wrap up.
Perfect.
Tell people like where they find you, or like
Yeah. So
what's your plan for the summer?
hmm So you'll find me here on Earthshine Astrology, so melpriestley.ca. If you are interested in a consultation, I do those, so you can find that booking link through there right at the top.
Hmm.
Yep. And I write fairly regularly. I always try and be as regular as I can. However, I go through
You're a mom.
lulls. I am a mom. I am a new mom again. So I am on a maternity leave right now. So it's inconsistent. It's more writing than I actually was doing in the previous year, which is great, but it is, I'm kind of all over in that respect. But, sign up for my Substack and you can find the link on this blog too, because then you'll get my latest writings delivered straight to your inbox. I am on Substack in terms of like more social, like
Hmm.
if you were interested in chatting, you can get me through there. Although I will say, again, it's very inconsistent and I've basically stepped away from all other social media. Like you can find, I have an X account, I have an Instagram account, but please don't message me through there because I'm not going to see it.
Yeah.
So if you do want to get in touch, email, which you can find through this site, or Substack will be the best ways to reach me. Yeah.
Or if you want to like reveal a secret that you don't think anyone else is going to hear, you could just message her that way and she won't ever hear
Yes.
it, but you'll have the privilege of like saying it out loud. Sometimes it's helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'll find it in like 3 years when I log in again and go,
Yeah.
oh, what's this?
So you heard it here. Email her your darkest secrets for this Pluto and Aquarius trine Uranus and Gemini.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Mel. It was good to chat with you. And yeah, we've got 2 weeks basically until Uranus goes into Gemini. So thanks
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
recording this on this side of it. And maybe we can do like a recap in a year or
Yeah.
6 months or whatever and be like, how is it now?
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And again, thank you for having me. And yeah, I wish everyone all the best with this and hopefully you can find this exciting because it is exciting times.
All right. Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Please unbuckle your seatbelts. The plane is about to land. Like and subscribe.